Get to those major developments out of the Middle East. President Trump officially signed a peace agreement between Gaza and Israel alongside world leaders, all in hopes of bringing sustainable peace in the region.
It's been a long time coming. The deal bringing home the remaining 20 living Israeli hostages that have been held for the past 2 years by Hamas, as well as hundreds of Palestinian prisoners that were being detained by the IDF.
Despite this deal pausing 2 years of war that's killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, there are still major questions on what lies ahead for Gaza.
Yeah, that phase 2, very important as well. We have live team coverage. Our Tom Fitzgerald getting a local reaction. But let's start with Nana St. who's following the latest developments coming out of Egypt. Nana?
Hey, guys, right now, President Trump is on his way home from Egypt after signing a peace agreement with other world leaders. It comes hours after the president visited Israel, where he celebrated a U.S.-brokered ceasefire with Hamas. As part of this deal, for the first time in 2 years, there is not one living Israeli hostage being held by Hamas in Gaza. One by one, the remaining living hostages reunited with their families in Israel. Israel also releasing Palestinian prisoners. President Trump declared that this is a golden age for Israel and urged the country to work towards lasting peace.
Together we've achieved what everybody said was impossible. At long last, we have peace in the Middle East, and it's a very simple expression, peace in the Middle East, and we've heard it for many years, but nobody thought it could ever get there, and now we're there.
But the next phase of this deal will likely prove more difficult to implement. That's the disarming of Hamas and the creation of a new governing authority in the Gaza Strip. And about 200 U.S. service members will be headed to the region to make sure both sides hold up their end of the deal, but they'll be monitoring the ceasefire from Israel. No boots on the ground in Gaza.
Thank you. Reaction pouring in around the world and here in our region as the hostages are released. At the Israeli embassy here in the nation's capital, staffers are responding with a mix of relief and caution about what comes next. Tom Fitzgerald live tonight at the Israeli embassy. Fitz, you spoke with one of the top officials there. What are they saying tonight?
Well, remember, this news now comes only, 2 years after Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel, but just 5 months after 2 embassy staffers here were gunned down in an anti-Semitic attack back in May at the Capitol Jewish Museum. Now, here at the Israeli embassies, you can see behind us, there are flags that have been put out for the victims of the strife that has gone on in that region. Now, what did happen today were that the photos of the hostages that were being held, those were finally taken down today in a representation of them being returned. But the deputy chief of the mission here at the Israeli embassy, Eliav Benjamin, tells Fox 5, humanitarian aid will now flow into Gaza once all of the security agreements are met.
Phase 2 of this deal, or the framework, calls, of course, for the disarmament of Hamas and for them stepping down. And then we can start really talking about the, if you want, the rehabilitation, the reconstruction of Gaza.
So, Fitz, you were actually down at the White House today as this news spread around the world. What kind of reactions were you hearing from folks there?
A bit of a mixed bag, and keep in mind, Washington, D.C. has seen many of these protests over the last 2 years in regards to Gaza. We had, the sit-in at college campuses like at the George Washington University that went on for weeks and months. We had a very large pro-Palestinian demonstration over at Union Station last summer when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was here in Washington to address Congress. That ended in arrest. There was vandalism down at Union Station. We saw American flags pulled down off of poles and burned. So Washington has really been at the center of this global reaction. A lot of the folks today said, yes, they were very pleased to hear about the ceasefire and to hear about the return of these hostages. However, they were not quite ready to say this declares peace in any regard, because a lot of these people can point to other agreements for peace in the Middle East, and sadly those did not take root. There is hope that this one will take root, but no one as of yet that we talked to down at the White House today said they were ready to declare, this was all over. They said they wanted to take a wait-and-see approach for many of the folks we spoke to who were visiting down at the White House today.
Absolutely. That second phase, again, so important. Tom, thank you so much.
President Trump signing a peace agreement between Israel and Hamas with world leaders. The president attending a peace summit in Egypt chaired by himself and the Egyptian president. Trump taking a moment to reflect on the historic signing of this agreement.
Together we've achieved what everybody said was impossible. At long last, we have peace in the Middle East, and it's a very simple expression, peace in the Middle East, and we've heard it for many years, but nobody thought it could ever get there, and now we're there.
Joining us now, founder and executive director for the National Security Institute, Jamil Jaffer. Jamil, you and I spoke last week about this moment. Would it happen? Would it not? A lot of people waiting with bated breath. And in fact, that first point of that 20-point plan did happen. What do you make of today?
Well, it's kind of amazing, Marina. You never expected that you'd see this day when all the living hostages are back in Israel, the remaining deceased ones also potentially coming back as well, and the Israeli forces sort of having withdrawn to further lines. So, this is the historic day. You can tell President Trump loves the phrase "peace in the Middle East," but look, he's receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom in Israel later today. He'll get the award. The Order of the Nile in Egypt. Clearly, well-deserved awards for ending this war. Now the question is, will we see a lasting peace, Marina, like you and I talked about last week? Will we see Hamas disarmed and out of power and a transition government and then ultimately the Palestinian Authority in place? We'll see if that happens. But at a minimum, today, big day for Israelis with the hostages coming home and a big ending, hopefully, for Hamas and that terrorist group finally being taken down and taken out of power.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think the world is looking at our president, and for a lot of people, especially in the Middle East, they see him as the president that was able to end this. Now, the bigger question, because if you ask President Trump, is the war over? He says yes. However, here in the West, it seems as though people are not so quick to say the same. Doesn't seem as though they believe it. And to your point, there's 19 points here, and the bigger one, Hamas disarming after 18 years of control in Gaza, a place that is completely leveled, for lack of a better term here. So many people murdered, dead. What's to come now, and how does it start? As we saw the signing of this ceasefire plan here, but nobody really knows exactly what that plan says.
No, you're exactly right, Marina. The challenge here is that you've got Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel saying, the military operations aren't over. President Trump on Air Force One on the way into Tel Aviv and then Jerusalem this morning saying the war is over. So who's right? And ultimately, how this plays out, we'll see what happens. But at a minimum, President Trump's view is we're at peace now, and now he expects neither party to engage. And now we've got to talk about rebuilding Gaza and restoring peace there, ensuring security for Israel while ensuring the Palestinians have a place to live. These are all questions that have plagued the Middle East for decades. We haven't seen a real resolution. And, a lot of us have always thought that it would take the U.S. putting troops on the ground to enforce some sort of a real peace settlement. And now there's, a small number, but 200 American troops on the ground there. That's an important, I think, signal that the U.S. is there to stay, that we're there to help make peace and help get this thing done. Look, we'll see how this plays out. President Trump has also said he was going to end the war in Ukraine. He hasn't done that yet. But at least in this case, he's ended the war. Now we got to see whether, in fact, like you say, there can be real long-term peace and stability and that restoration and an opportunity for these two people who have fought over this land for generations to find a way to live together in peace.
Yeah, I mean, this is not something that started October 7th, 2 years ago. To your point, this has been ongoing for centuries now. But I think you make a big point here, which is the American troops on the ground. Now, they're not going to be policing Gaza. At least that's what the president has led us to believe. The bigger question here is, how much of this does the Middle East rely on the American government? Because a couple days ago, Egypt was telling the United States, Hamas is not going to surrender. This is not going to happen unless you have Witkoff and Kushner come and speak directly with the leadership of Hamas. And so they did. And it was in that very moment that we saw the Secretary of State pass that note to the president saying, we've got a deal here. So how much is this incumbent about leaving troops on the ground there to make sure that this continues?
Well, Marina, this is a really important point. It just demonstrates how important American leadership is across the globe, right? Our allies and friends want us to lead. They want us to engage. They don't want us to focus back here at home and leave the world behind. It's important that we push back on our adversaries and support our allies. And so it's important that, it took Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff going there and getting the deal done, because that demonstrates America's power and role in the world. And it's also something we should step back from. A lot of people have said, President Obama sort of famously said, we need to lead from behind. President Trump has talked about sort of, focusing back here at home and getting America out of wars, out of conflicts worldwide. And the truth is, America should and always will act in her own interest. But that oftentimes means supporting our friends and allies, opposing our enemies, and being forthright about being present in other parts of the world, whether that's in the middle of Europe, where Ukraine and Russia are fighting, in the Middle East, where Israel is fighting a war against Hamas in Gaza, or in the Indo-Pacific, where China's threatening once again our friends in the Philippines and our friends in Taiwan.
Before we go, because I think if anybody has the pulse, the geopolitical pulse, if you will, it would be you here. Obviously, when you're here in the United States, we're so fractured as a country that I think even on the opposing political side, it's hard to give victories to whomever it may be. On the larger scale here, a geopolitical sense, how much of a victory is this for America and for the president himself?
Well, look, no matter what you think about President Trump, you can't help but admit this is a big victory for our country. We want peace in that region. We want our friends in Israel to be safe, but we also want the Palestinian people to have a homeland, and we want the Arab states to recognize Israel and enter into strong economic relationships that are present there in the region. That's a win for everybody in the region. It's a win for the world. It's a win for our friends in Europe, and it's a win for America. Whatever else you think about President Trump, you got to acknowledge this is a big win for him and his team, and frankly, for his style of diplomacy with Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner getting this deal done.
I see Erdogan directly behind the president. Do you make anything of the fact that Erdogan said he'd turn his plane around if Netanyahu did in fact come after al-Sisi invited him?
Well, look, Erdogan is a tough guy. He likes to make tough statements, like a lot of the folks in the Middle East and frankly globally. We've got folks like Putin and Xi who are always making comments like that as well. Erdogan, of course, is an American ally. He's a member of Turkey is a member of NATO, right? But Erdogan has been playing, a little bit of back and forth. He bought S-400 missiles from the Russians. So we need to make sure, that President Erdogan is on the American team, on the NATO team. It's good he was there. He's an important part of this process in the Middle East, sitting there at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. But we also can't let, President Erdogan push us around. President Trump, has a good relationship with him. Hopefully they can find a path forward. Turkey is a very important nation. But President Erdogan should be aware he cannot push the United States around.
Jamil, always so good to talk to you and get a breakdown of what's happening. We appreciate it, no doubt, an historic day.